something that Bordeaux wine lovers really don't like to talk about. Most of the Medoc only really began planting vineyards in the 1760s. This makes the region younger than the Argentine, Chilean, and South African wine industry. In fact, many parts of the left bank, from famed appellations like Margaux or Pauillac or Saint-Julien or Saint-Estèphe, were little more than swamps and marshlands by the time the South African wine industry was already exporting top-class wines to Europe. But the South African wine industry has been forced to press reset a number of times due to some bizarre and unfortunate reasons. One of the most positive reset moments, however, came in 1973 when South Africa's wine of origin legislation came into effect. And what this meant was that for the first time, grape farmers in South Africa could become wine estates. Previously, they would have had to harvest their grapes and were forced to send it off to a government-controlled central co-op where all the grapes were vinified together to produce wine and then sold and exported as a kind of homogeneous whole. But now, under the new wine of origin legislation, 14 estates were given licenses to not only harvest their own grapes and vinify them on the estate, but also to bottle them, label them, and sell them as estate wines. These pioneering estates, or the first 14 as they are now collectively called, may seem like a small number, but really they were the beginning of a massive cultural shift in how South African wine was made and viewed and sold internationally. And why are we talking about the first 14? Well, because today's hand drink solo wine of the day is from one of the first 14 estates. It is the Muratie estate Laurens Campher White Blend, which is made using all estate fruit. It was vinified by winemaker Hutting de Villiers and comes from the Stellenbosch ward of Simonsburg, Stellenbosch. If you happen to be one of those wine tourists who has to take notes on each estate just to try and remember which one is which, then you probably will have noted down Muratie as the one with the cobwebs. Even the estate's website uses these cobweb images on their landing page. And you might think to yourself,
that's a little strange.
And truth be told, it is a little odd. But when you get to know the estate better, you realize just how rich a sense of history they have and how important they deem that connection to history. In fact, if you're going to make sense of the estate or the family or their rather large range of wines, then you almost have to have a love and appreciation for history. Luckily for this particular estate, their history is so colorful that it reads less like a history lecture and more like a few consecutive episodes of Days of Our Lives. So starting back at the very beginning, while the aromas from the very first pressed wine of the Cape still hung in the air, a brave and dapper German soldier called Laurens Campher strode the streets of the town of Stellenbosch. This was in the 1680s or so, and as he strode, he had fixings to start farming in a little estate called Muratie. But before he could get too far, he was rooted to the spot, for he had been struck by the beauty of a slave woman. Her name was Ancilla van der Kaap, and she was descended from a brave and noble West African family. Such intense love he felt for her that she immediately felt pregnant thrice and had as many children. As soon as Laurens had attained the grant for the farm, Ancilla and Laurens moved to Muratie and lived there happily ever after. But then, as it was, the mysterious sands of time trickled through that eternal hourglass for almost 100 years, until in the 1780s, a tall, dark, mysterious stranger called Martin Milk, who was a Prussian mercenary, cast his shadow across the hearth of this humble estate. Rumors abounded about this shadowy mercenary and how he had gathered great wealth for himself, although as it turned out most of this was through marriage. And so with this great wealth, as an extravagant expression of love, he bought the estate for his daughter, Anna Catharina. It should be noted, Martin Milk was the first Milk heir to own Muratie estate. And as Martin was as charismatic as he was mysterious, it should come as no surprise that the estate was by now beloved by nobles of the region. And so it would be logical that a senator in the area should set his eye on the estate. And so it was that Sir Walter Ernest Mortimer Stanford bought Muratie as a party pad for his scandalously gregarious wife, Lady Alice, who it is reputed lived for lawn tennis, hunting parties, fancy dress, and general girth or mirth. But there came a time when the music faded and the party lights were dimmed by the mists of history. Until 1927, when a bold horse-riding artist called George Paul Cannitz came cantering over the hill with his daughter. He was an artist, so of course he cantered. And they stumbled upon Muratie Estate completely by accident, almost like Narnia at the back of a cupboard. And they both immediately fell in love with the estate, not with each other. And he bought the estate on a whim. George Paul Cannitz also then planted, grew, bottled South Africa's very first Pinot Noir. He was an artist, of course he drank Pinot Noir. And upon his death, he left the estate to his daughter, Alberta Anna Marie, who then became one of the Western Cape's first female wine estate owners. As a final chapter in 1987, a man called Ronnie Melk, who had a little less charisma and mystery than a Prussian mercenary, but a little more love for history, bought back Muratie Estate, restoring it to the Melk family. And it is the Melk family who still own it today. But we all know that you can't drink history, so let's get into the glass. Well, when you give it a sniff, well, it always stokes me out when you can kind of try and tease apart what's in the blend simply by the aromas alone. And I think this wine certainly has enough of a nose to at least allow you to try. Up front, there are these really distinct elements of peaches and apricot, and really, if I were a betting man, I'd pin that on the Chenin Blanc, which does make up more than 50% of the blend. But then there are also these crazy, salty, almost kelpy sea spray type elements, which almost certainly are going to come from a cultivar like Verdelho, which makes up a splash of the blend. But then there are also smoky, more mineral, stony, flinty type notes. And while you could possibly also pin that on Verdelho, it would seem silly not to at least take a gander that it could be the 30% Sauvignon Blanc responsible for those elements. And when we finally give it a sip, well, I guess we shouldn't have been surprised that there's going to be a really pronounced sense of brightness or elegance to the wine, because Chenin is a high acid cultivar, but Sauvignon Blanc and Verdelho are even more so. So you have the sweeter stone fruit notes that come into the wine, but they are immediately set to right by this really crazy, juicy, laser-like citrus acidity that cuts right through the middle of it all. That said, the Chenin and also the small 7% of Viognier really do pull their weight, because the palate has a really textured, almost like marula fruit, chewy textureness to it. So that stone fruit is by no means a back-footed Bertie and is every bit a match for that citric acidity. Finally, if you give the wine time to warm in the glass, then actually the Viognier starts to speak a little more loudly, and you get a beautiful, almost floral puff of mandarin or naartjie sherbet at the back, and that's worth waiting for. This white blend is a really well put together concoction, and for my money, I think some of South Africa's premium white blends are the best wines that we're producing across the entire board. And so to try and prove that to you, I've left a link to 2 more videos which both talk about really, really interesting white blends that can show you not only what these dynamic South African winemakers are capable of, but also the sorts of cultivars that they are starting to put together in combinations that really are unique to South Africa.